Good afternoon, participants. Welcome to the webinar on the National Child Development Study and the 1970 British Cohort Study. My name is Brian Dodgen. I'm a member of the Centre for Longitudinal Studies. And this is what the Centre for Longitudinal Studies does. We're based here at the UCL Institute of Education, and we're responsible for the British Birth Cohort Studies, the 1958 study and 1970 study, which is what we're going to be talking on today. And also there's two other studies, the Millennium Cohort Study and the Next Step Study. We're funded by the ESRC, the Economic and Social Research Council, currently for till 2020, but we hope to get funding after that, of course. And we provide free data to the research community by depositing it at the UK Data Archive. So every survey we do, every sweep to follow up these longitudinal studies, we deposit it at the UK Data Archive, and I'll be showing you later how you get the data from the UK Data Archive. We also have documentation, guidance and training. So we have a user support facility that enables people to ask us for advice about how to analyze the data, how to conduct research. We conduct our own research as well. It's multidisciplinary, substantive and methodological. So we also advise about how to conduct surveys and how to statistically analyze the survey data. We've also got a thing called the Cross-Cohort Research Programme, which is funded till this year, or to the end of this year, on healthy lifestyles and social mobility. And we encourage international collaborations and visits. So researchers from all over the world come to visit us and to discuss the data, and also to suggest extra things we could put in on new follow-ups that we're planning. So this is the agenda for the next hour and a half. I'm doing from 2 o'clock till 2:30. That's me, Brian Dodgen. At 2:30, Matt Brown, our colleague here, will be talking about what's new in NCDS and BCS 17. At 2:50, my other colleague, Martina Narayanan, will be talking about measures of well-being in these two cohorts. And then from 3:10 onwards, there'll be a space for general questions and answers. And if you have any questions as we go along, for instance, in the 2 to 2:30 session, I'll try and aim to finish about 2:25, and we can deal with any questions that come in during that half an hour and so on. And we can deal with any questions related to these three presentations, either at the end of the presentation or in the session 3:10 to 3:30. So this is the introduction to the surveys. And my bit for the next half an hour will be divided into 4 main parts. The study design of these two surveys, NCDS and BCS 70, what the sweeps are like. The sweep, that terminology means when you go back in a longitudinal way to see how people are getting on at a new stage in their life. What is the sample? How did we sample them in the first place? Then we're talking about how you can access the data if you want to do research on these data sets, what documentation is available and how you get it. And then we also deal with the problem of missing data and what happens about attrition in a longitudinal study. So this is the timeline of the studies. The two we're going to be dealing with in this webinar are these two, National Child Development Study and the British Cohort Study 1970. So this is 1920, 1940, 1960, 1980, 2000 and so on. The 1958 cohort study, even though it's still called the National Child Development Study, they're all about 60 years old now. Well, in fact, they're exactly 60 years old. They just had their 60th birthday. And the BCS 70 participants are now 48 years old. And then there's 2 other surveys which we deal with at the Centre for Longitudinal Studies, Next Steps and the Millennium Cohort Study, which started later. So they're nicely staggered by about 12 years each. So NCDS and BCS 70 can be thought of as fully representative samples of the Great Britain population. We also put /UK because United Kingdom includes Northern Ireland, but NCDS only covered Great Britain. BCS70 did cover Northern Ireland in the birth survey, but the Northern Ireland sample weren't followed up after that unless they moved to Great Britain. And they're based on 1 week's babies. So it's fully representative in the sense that we aimed to interview everybody who had a baby in one particular week in 1958, and then everybody who had a baby in one particular week in 1970. So it's not a stratified, they're not stratified, they're fully representative because it's everybody who was born in that week. And they're followed up from birth into adulthood, and we're still following them now. These surveys are multi-purpose and multidisciplinary. So they both started out with more of a medical focus, but we have branched out into looking at every aspect of life: employment, family formation, education, training, and so on. And they're resources for the research and policy communities. And what does that mean? Long-term outcomes of experience and decisions in early life. Well, the good thing about longitudinal research is that you can see how things that happen to you when you're a child affect what kind of a person you end up being and what experiences you have when you've grown up. So we can look at questions like, if your parents read to you as a child, is that beneficial? In what way is it beneficial? Do you end up doing better at English, maths, or whatever? And we also look at medium and short-term outcomes and links between different life domains. So, for instance, health and employment. You can look in a longitudinal study. You can look at things like, does long-term ill health cause unemployment, or is it the opposite way around? Is it that long-term unemployment causes ill health? And the good thing is, because we're following people throughout different stages of their life, we can see which things came first, which is the advantage over a cross-sectional survey, so that it just takes place at one point in time. We look at descriptions of individual trajectories, careers, relationships, fertility, poverty, disadvantage. So we can look at what causes some people to be resilient in the face of disadvantage, and what causes some people to suffer bad outcomes and not be able to call upon resilience. We can also look at intergenerational transmission of advantage and disadvantage and the processes involved. So, for instance, if you came from a background where your parents were in well-paid employment, does that mean it's more likely that you will be in well-paid employment when you grow up? What are the processes involved in that kind of intergenerational transmission of advantage? Is it that they can afford to pay for you to go to good education, and therefore you get good qualifications, and that's what gets you a good job? Or is it the old boy network? Is it just the connections that your parents have, or is it to do with health advantages? We can see the processes involved in intergenerational effects. And we can also look at the links between social change and the changing experiences of different cohorts. So, for instance, times have changed since 1958. Back in 1958, it was illegal to be gay. One-parent families were much more frowned upon than they are now. And so we can look at in what ways the different cohorts experience the change in expectations in the wider society. Okay, so looking at NCDS in particular to start with, we'll come to BCS70 in a minute. It's all babies born in a single week in 1958. So we aimed to get every single baby that was born in that particular week in 1958. And amazingly, 98.1% of all babies took part in the first birth survey. So we're picking up babies from all over Great Britain. And so we were very fortunate to get the cooperation of health visitors and doctors in order to pick up that higher percentage. And in fact, even though there's 1.9% that we missed, we still picked up about another almost 1% again in the first follow-up at age 7. Okay, we've got quite a high retention, so there's still 9,000 people participating in recent sweeps, and we're still in touch with about 12,500 people of the original 18,000. So there's 17,415 to start with. Some of them have died, of course, but not all that many. We're about 1,800 have died so far. It's multidisciplinary with content spanning social and biomedical, and it's made an outstanding contribution to science and policy across many areas. I'll point out some of the things later. So this is the NCDS study timeline. We started out with at birth with 17,415, and then 15,425 at age 7. At age 11, 15,300. So we gradually have lost people through as time has gone on, and that's of course attrition. Part of the loss was that about 750 children died in the first month after they were born, and that's why it was originally called the perinatal mortality study, because in 1958 there was a problem of a high proportion of babies not surviving to the end of the first month or being stillborn. And so these figures gradually go down as time goes on. We'll see with BCS 70 that there's a certain amount of attrition. In 1978, we actually collected everybody's examination results. That's available in a file called the NCDS exams file, which is downloadable with the NCDS 4 age 23 dataset. At age 33, there was the mother and child survey. So a sample of 1 in 3 cohort members were asked questions about the relationship between the mother and child, and also some children were given cognitive tests. And in 2002-3, when they were age 44, 45, there was a biomedical survey, which we'll come on to in the later slide. And then later we've had consent for record linkages, which Matt will be talking about a little bit later. And then the first web data collection was at age 55, when we had the mixed mode. Some people filled in the data on the web, and other people were given a telephone interview. And this is the topics covered by life stage in NCDS. At birth, we looked a lot about obstetric history, smoking in pregnancy, any problems with the pregnancy itself, antenatal care, the labor, was there any pain relief, any problems during the labor, and problems with at birth, and so on. And smoking in pregnancy is worth mentioning because, strange as it may seem, it wasn't known until the 1958 survey that smoking in pregnancy was bad for your child. And Professor Neville Butler's results of the research that he did from organizing the 1958 survey showed that smoking in pregnancy causes your child to have a much lower birth weight. And that led to change in government policy, or change in health NHS policy to advise people to not smoke in pregnancy. Before that, it had been known that smoking was bad for you yourself, but not until this research was it shown that smoking was bad for the baby. In the school years, we look at family, parental employment, financial services, behaviour at school, views and expectations, and your attainment at school. And then when you get to be an adult, we look at your own family formation, your own employment, income, housing, health-related behaviour, courses and qualifications, and your own cognitive ability. So we can see how the cognitive tests we gave you when you were a child affect your cognitive ability as an adult. And these are the childhood cognition tests we did at ages 7, 11, and 16. At age 7, we've got the arithmetic and reading tests, which you might expect. But we also got these visuospatial tests, the copying designs, and the draw a man test, which are more showing how good you are at perceiving things on the piece of paper and replicating them. At age 11, we've again got reading and maths, but also the an NFER general ability test, and the copying designs test, which is similar to the one at age 7. And at age 16, reading and mathematics, and we've also got the teacher's assessment of how good you are at English and maths. And then when we came to age 44, 45, we had the biomedical sweep, which was the first time there'd been taking of lots of samples from the cohort members, biosamples of blood and saliva. 9,000 study members took part. We got blood pressure, pulse, standing and sitting height, and so on, all these different measurements and things like forced expiratory volume and FVC, I forgot what that is, forced something else, forced controlled volume, I think it is. So we can tell how well your lungs are doing. Also, all these things here on the left-hand side, these are hemostatic and inflammatory biomarkers. So by looking at things like von Willebrand factor and fibrinogen, we can tell how much your body has related to the amount of stress you've had in your life. And we can also look at early and late morning saliva cortisol, which is another measure of stress. And these biomarkers can be lumped together to look at how you have coped with the amount of stress you've had in your life, and plenty of people have done research on that. The access to, we've also got taken blood samples which have been processed into genetic SNPs, single nucleotide polymorphisms, and these are available. These blood samples are available from Metadac, which is based in Newcastle University. It used to be based in Bristol, and genetic data can be used in phenotype-genotype linkages. GWAS stands for Genome-Wide Association Studies. You can use Mendelian randomization, or you can also just use the biological samples to get at those biomarkers like fibrinogen, C-reactive protein. Okay, so that's NCDS. Now we go on to BCS70. That began as the British Birth Survey in 1970, and it's similarly to NCDS. We've got births of 17,000 babies. It's everyone born in 1 week in 1970. Started out collecting from Northern Ireland, but the Northern Ireland members weren't followed up unless they moved to Great Britain. The early focus was on medical outcomes, but with each sweep, the scope has broadened. And here's the sources of information. We got, first of all, the early years, we interview the parents, and then we interview the teachers at school, then the cohort member from age 16 onwards. And then from age 26 onwards, it's just the cohort member themselves because they've grown up then. And then we had a 1 in 2 sample of children at age 34 who did cognitive tests. And these are the childhood topics. They're similar to what we had in NCDS, smoking and drinking by the parents at ages, when the child was aged 0, 5, 10, 16, pregnancy history, maternal mental health, and smoking in pregnancy and so on. So similar to NCDS. And here the other childhood topics, various physical measurements and lifestyle, diet, eating problems, sedentary behavior, dental and physical hygiene, smoking. We asked about drink and drugs at age 16. So it's possible to do research on whether there's any bad outcomes from risky behavior in teenage years. And then behavior and mental, we looked at behavioral problems at ages 5 and 10, mental health, well-being, personality, locus of control and self-esteem. Locus of control means how much you feel in charge of your own life, or whether you're at the mercy, or do you feel you're at the mercy of events. And then the childhood cognition tests that we did at ages 5, 10 and 16 are similar to NCDS, but not quite the same. Copying designs and Draw a Man were the same. English picture vocabulary test and the Chernow graded reading tests, they're slightly different from NCDS. The shortened Edinburgh reading test is different from NCDS. British ability scales, 2 verbal subscales on word definitions and word similarities, and then age 16, arithmetic, vocabulary, spelling, reading comprehension, and matrices. We can do cross-cohort comparisons between the two cohorts, and in some respects, the results are surprising. You'd think that the older cohort would be more likely to smoke during pregnancy, but only 29% of the 1958 mothers smoked during pregnancy. 41% of the 1970 cohort did smoke. And that's partly because Neville Butler's research showing smoking was bad for your baby didn't get published in the Lancet until, on British Medical Journal, sorry, till 1972, just 2 years too late for this cohort to take any notice of that. And then breastfeeding was more popular in the older cohort. 1958 cohort was 69% more likely to breastfeed. The younger cohort, 38% likely to breastfeed. And the 58 cohort, 92% had measles by age 10. How do you get hold of the data? This is how to access NCDS and BC70 data from the UK Data Service. And I'll show you, we can't actually go on the online to the data service itself, but what you do is you register with the UK Data Service at that address. There's various types of license. The main one is the end user license. That's normal access to anonymized data. For any sensitive and disclosive data, looking at small areas or things like cause of death, then you have to have a special license or even a secure access license. The secured access is for very disclosive data, which can't be downloaded and instead is accessed remotely. And you get a choice of formats for download. It can be SPSS data or tab delimited. And that's what the UK Data Service website looks like. If you just press on longitudinal studies there, you get to this page, which is what it looks like at the UK Data Service. Longitudinal studies show things like the British Birth Cohort Study, and further down, National Child Development Study. And if we click on National Child Development Study at the UK Data Service website, you get this page. And it shows you, that's the main thing you need to click on. If you click on these, if you want special license access, but we'll not deal with that for the time being. And pressing on that main NCDS link, you get all of these NCDS data sets. So it shows all the different data sets there's been. So we've got the childhood data, which is sweeps 0 to 3, which is longitudinally linked all for you. So that's when they were born, when they're age 7, 11, and 16. But then there's all these subsequent sweeps right up to sweep 9 when they're 55. And there's also the response and outcomes data set, which is quite useful because it tells you which people were present at which sweeps. And then if you click on, for instance, the childhood data set here, you get this page. National Child Development Study childhood data. So you can download by pressing that button there. What you'll be told if you try and download is that you need to register with the UK Data Service, but as long as you're using it for academic purposes and you're not trying to discover anybody's identity or sell them anything, then you'll be fine. And you can even access online, you can access the data online and run various frequency counts and tabulations. That's a thing called NestStar, which I won't demonstrate now, but it's useful to know that that exists. And then that's how you download the data from the UK Data Archive website. You can also get plenty of documentation about NCDS and BC70 on the CLS website. And this is what the CLS website currently looks like. All that writing is on there because we're advertising the fact that essays written by age 11 NCDS members are available for research analysis. And so what documentation is available from the CLS website? User guides, the full questionnaires, so you can see exactly every single question we ever asked people. even whether it's face-to-face or telephone or self-completion or online versions. Some things have to be self-completion because we're asking people about things which they may not want to talk out loud. Technical reports are looking at how the field work went, how the design was sampled, and also you can explore variables at the UK Data Service. As I was saying, there's the Nestar software, which shows frequency counts of all variables on request, and you can create a user account to explore Nestar even further by looking at cross tabulations and charts. Now I need to go to the next slide. This is what the CLS website currently looks like. It's being redesigned though, so it won't look like this for very much longer. But I thought I'd just show you how the general principle by which you navigate around the website, which will be similar navigation in the future. If you wanted to click, for instance, on 1970 British Cohort Study and find out documentation there, you click on that bit on the left-hand side, and it explodes out into this brown series of options: history of the study, about the sample, published work, and so on. What you want to do is go to surveys and documentation. You click on that, and you get this expanded bunch of options: surveys and documentation for each of the sweeps: 1970, 75, 80, 86, and so on up to 2016. And supposing we wanted to click on BC70 2000 survey, we click on there, and that takes us to the 2000 survey here. You'll see that's now exploded up into these options: questionnaires, technical papers, data notes, user guides. So if we click on questionnaire for NCDS 2000, we get this, and it shows you the actual questions one by one, even with instructions to the interviewer saying, ask this question if they answered no to the previous question, and so on. So what were the reasons for moving when you tended to move? This would only be, of course, asked to people who said they were going to move house. And finally, I'm going to talk about missing data. What about attrition in NCDS and BCS 17? We've looked at the fact that in NCDS, we lost a certain amount of members of the cohort. In BCS 70, we started out with 16,571 in the first survey. At age 5, it was down to 13,000, but then back up to 14,800 by age 10. But so when people don't participate, it's not necessarily permanent. It might be just that we couldn't trace them at the time, and we later got better at tracing people because we are reliant on people to let us know where they've moved to. This was a postal survey in age 26, so not so many people for that, because not everybody likes to apply to postal surveys. We were back up to 11,000 by age 30. Telephone survey at age 38 was slightly less, and so on. So the responses varied at different sweeps, and that would be okay if everybody who didn't respond was the same type of person as the people who do respond. I should point out that there is a distinction between unit non-response, that is where the cohort member themselves doesn't participate in the survey at all, and item non-response, that is where the participant is definitely around and there to be interviewed, but they refuse some specific questions. And the types of unit non-response, that's non-participation, are non-contact by field workers or the tracing team. So we couldn't actually manage to contact the person. Some people just do flat out refuse. So that's perfectly fine if they don't want to participate anymore. In fact, we're always very pleasantly surprised that people do continue to cooperate with us and don't feel put out. Inability to respond, or emigration, or death. And we get informed of people's death by the National Health Service Central Register. Unit non-response may not be permanent, as we saw with BCS 70. Now, why does attrition bias matter? attrition reduces statistical power and it biases associations, affecting the generalizability of results. So you might say, well, what does generalizability mean? Well, what it means is that if you do research on a subsample of the population, we're not surveying the whole population of 60 million people. We're just sampling 17,500 people who were born in either 1958 or another 17,500 born in 1970. And if we draw certain conclusions from that subsample of the population, we need to be able to show that it's still representative of the wider population of Britain. And the good thing about longitudinal birth cohort data enables us to better understand the nature of attrition and account for it. It's more likely that men will fall out than women. We lose more men than women over time. Those from lower social class backgrounds are more likely to drop out, and those lacking basic skills are more likely to drop out. But the good thing is that because we had such a wide coverage in the early sweeps, we know enough about the people who have dropped out from their early information. So a range of methods available for us to account for attrition, and there are three main ways in which people historically have dealt with attrition, and we'll tell you the one we like best. People have dealt with attrition through inverse probability weighting, where attrition weights are constructed to equal to the inverse of the probability of participating in the study. So you compensate people dropping out by multiplying by the inverse of the probability that they'll participate. There's various forms of multiple imputation, chained equations, and various other types of multiple imputation. And there's also FIML, full information maximum likelihood, where missing data is dealt with directly in the estimation of the likelihood. So the difference between this and multiple imputation is that multiple imputation provides you with imputed data sets, whereas FIML deals with it whilst it just adjusts the estimates in order to deal with missingness. And this is the approach that we prefer ourselves, a CLS missing data strategy. It's a data-driven approach to identify the key predictors of non-response in NCDS and BCS17. And so far, the analyses have been just carried out for NCDS, and a report and user guide is coming very soon. We've produced a list of auxiliary variables which are predictors of non-response for users to adapt their own specific analyses and fully explore richnesses of NCDS to reduce bias due to missing data. So we found that certain predictors of non-response include social class, region, health status, literacy, and so on. And we've shown that by using these auxiliaries, we're able to restore sample representativeness in NCDS despite attrition. So what we're saying is that if you get a series of auxiliary variables which predict non-response, then you can use multiple imputation using these auxiliary variables to compensate for non-response. And for more information, see George Plubidis' presentation on CLS missing data strategy at the Royal Statistical Society, 26th of October 2017, on large longitudinal studies, design and methodology. Now, that's the end of the session, which I've slightly overrun. I apologize, 2 minutes over, but I'm happy to deal with questions now. My colleague is going to tell me which questions were, if there were any. Oh, there haven't been any questions yet. Okay, we'll deal with questions right at the very end then. That makes me feel a bit less guilty about what we're running. I'm going to hand over to my colleague Matt Brown, who's going to talk about what's new in NCDS and BCS17.
Okay, afternoon everyone. My name's Matt Brown. I'm the survey manager for NCDS and BCS70 here at the Centre for Longitudinal Studies, and I'm going to tell you about some of the latest developments on the two studies. I'm going to start off with BCS70. And so firstly, I'm going to tell you about the current survey which we have in the field at the moment. So So this is the age 46 survey. It's actually been in the field for quite a long time. It's been in the field since July 2016 and is now coming towards an end 2 years later, which I'm very pleased about. It's been a very ambitious survey, which has involved lots of different elements of data collection. So firstly, participants have been asked to complete a paper questionnaire, which we send to them. They've then been asked to complete a face-to-face interview, which includes a series of cognitive assessments. After that, they're then visited by a nurse who takes a series of biomeasures, which I'll tell you more about in a moment. They've then also been asked to wear an accelerometer, and they've also been asked to complete an online questionnaire about their diet as well. This survey, I should say, has been funded by, in addition to the ESRC, it's also been funded by the Medical Research Council and the British Heart Foundation. In terms of what we cover in the age 46 survey, in the questionnaire we're covering most of the similar topics which have been included in all recent adult sweeps of BCS 70. So finding out about who the cohort member lives with and any relationships that they have with a partner, questions about their children and also grandchildren, and any other kinds of social contact that they have. We're asking for updated details about their housing situation and employment and income. We've got a very detailed set of questions about people's health this time around, so we're going into more detail than usual on that. Lots of questions about people's physical and mental health and well-being, and health behaviours as well, such as smoking, drinking, exercise and sleep, and as I mentioned, lots of questions this time around on diet. The interview also includes a series of cognitive assessments. Just to say briefly what those are. So there's 2 assessments of memory, where people are asked to recall a list of words. There's an assessment of executive function, the animal naming task, and the final assessment looks at how well people are able to pay attention to detail and to concentrate. That's the letter cancellation task. So this set of assessments are the same set of assessments which were conducted as part of the age 50 survey of NCDS, and they've also been included in the ELSA survey, the English Longitudinal Survey Study of Aging, and also in the 1946 cohort. But this is the first time that this set of assessments has been conducted with participants who are aged under 50. And the reason that we've done that is that there's some evidence that that cognitive function can begin to decline, as early as the mid-40s. So it was important to try and get a sense of that by including these assessments at age 46. So, as I mentioned, the participants are also receiving a visit from a nurse who's taking a series of biomeasures. So this is a very exciting development for BCS 70. It's the first time that we've been able to conduct objective measures of health since the cohort members were 16. And so this information that we're collecting this time, we'll be able to use in conjunction with all of the information that's been collected over the course of people's lives to look at the longitudinal predictors of people's health in midlife. The intention will also be to repeat some of these biomeasures again in future sweeps, so that the measures that we take this time around at 46 will be used as a baseline against which we can compare changes which will inevitably occur with aging. And as Brian mentioned, there was a biomedical survey of NCDS, which also took place in the mid-40s as well. So the information that we collect this time around will enable lots of very interesting cross-cohort comparisons of health in the mid-40s and how that's changed between the 58 and 1970 generations. In terms of the actual biommeasures that we're conducting, we're doing measurements of height, weight, body fat, waist and hip circumference. We're measuring blood pressure and grip strength. We're conducting a balance assessment as well. As per NCDS, we are also asking people to provide a blood sample, which will be used to do various different analyses. And also we've collected consent to extract DNA from the blood samples as well. And we'll also be storing part of the blood samples that we collect for future research. as yet unknown. And I mentioned that we're also asking people to wear an accelerometer. So the accelerometers that we're asking people to wear are called active power devices. These are worn on the thigh. Participants are asked to wear them for a week after their nurse visit. And these provide us with a very detailed measurement of the level of physical activity that people are involved in over the course of that week. They're fully waterproofed as well, so they can be worn continuously without taking them off, so they can be worn while swimming, while showering, etc. The fact that they're worn on the thigh, the idea is that the device measures the kind of angle at which the thigh is at all times, and therefore it can distinguish quite accurately between different types of sedentary activity, which other kinds of similar devices have been less good at doing. So these can distinguish quite accurately between standing, sitting, and sleeping, and then also the amount of transitions between those different states. So this is going to permit lots of very exciting research possibilities into the impact of physical activity on other aspects of people's lives. This is just a quick example of some of the feedback which is produced by that device, which we're able to send to participants as a kind of summary of the activity over the course of the week. So the blue is the time that people spent lying down, the yellow is when they were sitting, green is when they were standing, and the red is when people were actually moving around. So not typically that much time spent moving around. The online diet questionnaire. So the BCS70 has, in various sweeps, collected a brief amount of information about diet, but this time we're collecting a really detailed assessment of people's diets using an online web questionnaire developed by Oxford University, the Cancer Epidemiology Unit. People are asked to complete this on 2 out of the 7 days which follow their home visit. Those days are randomly allocated. And on each of those days, they're asked to complete this questionnaire, which where they're asked to recall everything that they either ate or drank in the 24-hour period prior to the day on which they're completing it. And then all of the information that they provide is used to derive a series of variables about the different levels of nutrients which people have consumed over those days. So we're coming to the end now of this survey. It's due to finish in July 2018, and that means that the data will be available to you via the UK Data Service, hopefully in April next year. That's all of the data from the questionnaire and most of the biomeasures, with the exception of the accelerometry data, which will require quite a lot more detailed cleaning work here at CLS, so that's scheduled to be released a bit later next year. And then just to mention briefly that the next survey, we hope, though funding is not yet fully confirmed, will take place when participants are age 50 in 2020. The hope is that that will be a face-to-face interview, which will be a fairly substantial one, lasting around 60 to 75 minutes, depending on funding. We're going to be we're going to be ensuring that there's as much cross-cohort comparability as possible with the content that was administered as part of the NCDS age 50 survey. We shall be running a consultation this year where we'll be inviting researchers to submit suggestions for topics which should be included in the BCS70 age 50 survey. So there'll first be an online consultation which will take place in the summer, and then there'll be a conference in around about October. Do keep an eye out for further news about those if you are interested in taking part in the consultation. And then broadly speaking, we'll be looking at starting the piloting and development of the age 50 survey throughout next year, with the main stage of data collection taking place in 2020. And then just briefly to say that there have been a couple of new data deposits at the archive. So there's a new partnership histories data set and a new economic activities data set, which both of those are longitudinal files which show career trajectories and partnership trajectories right the way through from when participants were age 16 up to the most recent sweep when they were 42. And then, so moving on to NCDS. So as Brian mentioned, this year marks a very important milestone for NCDS. The study and of course its participants celebrate their 60th birthday. So in March, in order to mark this occasion, we held a large international conference to showcase the huge wealth of research which is being conducted using data from NCDS. Also to thank participants for the time they've given us. We're currently producing a commemorative book which we'll be sending to them later in the year, which will include some of their own reflections on their experience of taking part in the study. And then coming up next is the age 61 survey. So that's going to be starting next year. We're just about to start working on the development and piloting of this study. Again, as per BCS 70, it's going to be quite a substantial and ambitious survey. It's again going to have a paper self-completion questionnaire, a face-to-face interview of 75 minutes with cognitive assessments again. There will also be another nurse visit, so this will be the second set of objective measures of health we've taken of the NCDS cohort in adulthood. We'll be repeating quite a lot of the measurements which were conducted in the previous biomedical survey when they're in their mid-40s, so we can see how health has changed since then. There are also some new measures as well, which I'll say a bit about in a moment. We're going to be asking people to complete a life history questionnaire as well. And we're also going to be administering the same online diet questionnaire, which we've used on the current BCS 70 survey. So a bit more detail about what will be in the age 61 survey. We're going to be asking lots of questions about people's family life and their relationships and their identity. As per usual, we'll be updating the information that we've got about people's finances and employment, but given people's age, we're also going into a lot more detail this time about people's plans for their retirement and their pensions arrangements which they have. And we will also be collecting lots of information about various aspects of people's health. The biomeasures that we're conducting this time around, so anthropometry again, height, weight, body fat, waist and hip circumference. We are conducting various measures of physical function, so grip, strength, balance and walking speed. None of those have been measured in NCDS previously. We'll be collecting a blood pressure measurement again. But this time around, we're also looking to measure how people's blood pressure responds to exercise. So we're going to be asking people to do a 2-minute step test, and then we're going to be measuring their blood pressure immediately after that, and then again after they've rested for 3 minutes after that, because there's some research which shows that looking at how people's blood pressure responds to exercise is a better predictor of cardiovascular health than simply measuring blood pressure in the usual resting state. And we'll be collecting another set of blood samples to conduct a wide range of different analyses. We will also be asking for a third of the sample. We'll be asking them to complete a life history questionnaire. This is funded by the National Institute of Health in the States, who also fund a lot of different aging studies, such as ELSA, which is the English Longitudinal Survey of Aging, the SHARE, which is a European aging study, and the HRS, which is an American aging study. These studies all started in the 50s, when the participants were in their 50s. So in order to collect information about their participants during their childhoods and younger adult lives, they've had to collect this information retrospectively, but there's obviously some question about how reliable people can provide this information retrospectively. So the idea of this is that the NIH are funding us to ask NCDS participants to recall their childhood and early life circumstances, and then we'll be able to compare that to the information that we collected at the time to see how closely they match up. In terms of recent data deposits, the most recent data deposit Brian mentioned in his introduction is the Age 11 Essays project. So when participants were aged 11, they were asked to write an essay about how they imagined their lives when they were 25, and asked to write about the lives they were leading, their interests, their home life, and what kind of work they would be doing. So 10,000 essays are now available for analysis at the UK Data Service. They've just recently been deposited, so that could potentially permit lots of hugely interesting research looking at how people's aspirations matched up to the reality of their lives. And we've recently actually been in touch with a number of participants and showed them the essays that they'd written and talked with them about how their lives had unfolded and how this compared with how they imagined their lives when they were 11. And that's led to a number of those people being interviewed by journalists, which has led to a couple of very nice features in the Times and the Mail recently, which you may have seen. We've also just recently deposited, as per BCS 70, new longitudinal history files showing people's career trajectories and relationships again. And just to finish off, also, not quite released as yet, but upcoming, both NCDS and BCS 70 have collected consent from participants to link the responses that they've given us in the surveys to administrative records held by the NHS and economic records held by the HMRC and the DWP. It's been a long road involving lots of negotiations with the data holders of this data, but we are making good progress now, and are hopeful that we'll soon be able to release the first sets of linked data for the two studies, which will be hospital episode statistics and information from the HMRC on people's earnings from PAYE data and self-assessment tax data. So those data sets should hopefully be available at the UK Data Service for analysis in the fairly near future. And so that was the end of my section. Has there been any questions at all? No? Okay. All right. I'm going to hand over to Martina then.
Okay, so this is now Martina Narayanan speaking. I'm a research associate at the Center for Longitudinal Studies, and I'll give you a quick overview of the measures we have on well-being in the two cohort studies. But first I'll just talk a little bit about how we define mental health and well-being before I show you what measures we have on well-being. And I'll also give you some examples of how you can use those data and how they have been used previously. There isn't really like the good construct for well-being or just a term for well-being. There's many different terms in the literature and can be quite confusing. The most commonly used are mental health, well-being, life satisfaction, and quality of life. They can tap into different constructs, but I guess what is common about all of those is that they sort of try to capture a positive aspect of mental health and well-being. And the mental health term is actually a little bit tricky because it has previously been used commonly to indicate, to look at mental ill health. So there have been in previous research, the focus has been on mental illness and symptoms of mental ill health. And then when the focus started going into mental health and maybe positive aspects, it has been often argued that mental health and mental ill health could be just two ends on the same dimension, even though quite a long time ago, in 1948, the World Health Organization has already provided a definition of health that is very commonly used. And they say this, health is the state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. And that indicates that it's not very wise to define mental health as the absence of mental illness. So a person who, for example, in the cohort studies doesn't report on any symptoms of anxiety or depression, it doesn't necessarily mean that that person is thriving in life and having like the highest life satisfaction or well-being in their life. So I'll show you, I'll talk about the measures we have on well-being, and I made this overview to show that we still have, because of the historical focus on mental illness, we have way more symptoms in the different cohort studies on mental illness than we have on well-being, but there are quite a few items, and the number reflects the number of items we have in each of the studies capturing mental illness or well-being. And you see that especially in that also in the NCDS and BCS, we have quite a few items you can use to look at positive aspects of well-being and mental health. And I have a while ago actually created an overview of all, like each and every item that is in all of the 4 cohort studies that we host at the Center for Longitudinal Studies. So if you follow that link, if you want to open it now or you can open it later, you will get to a website where you can download 2 PDF files basically. And one of the PDF files will give you an overview of all the items we have on general well-being. And the other PDF file will give you an overview of all the items we have on more domain-specific well-being in life, like, for example, relationship satisfaction, job satisfaction, which are like more specific to certain topics. Yeah, meanwhile, the first overview is just general well-being and life satisfaction. And the way those overviews are, the way you can use those overviews is they contain many different columns, and the first ones will indicate when the item has been collected. So I included the wave, which is the same as sweep. I included the year and the age that cohort member was at that time. And you will get an indication of who the item is addressed to, which is usually the cohort member, but not all of the time, because sometimes we have also asked parents or the children of cohort members to report on their well-being and life satisfaction. In the overview, you will also get the number, the 4 digits of the data set that corresponds to the same number on the website that Brian has explained to you where to download the links. You can go where to download the files. You can go there and see which of the files you have to download to get access to the exact items, and also the variable name in the data file that corresponds to the item. And there's a short description of what the item is about, what construct or topic it taps into, and if it's not just a single item, but if items are a collection of items on a scale, then I've also included the name of the scale. And then there's always a few more details that you see in the variable overviews: the item itself, the formulation of the item, the response categories that you get for each of the items. And I also included the approximate number of cases, so you get an impression of how many people have responded to the single items. Okay, so you can use some time to look at the variable overviews yourself if you're interested in well-being and life satisfaction, if you have specific ideas or you're looking for specific data to see if they're represented there. But I'll give you a quick overview. So as I said, I sort of like differentiate between general well-being and domain-specific well-being. And then you can also differentiate between single items and scales. So examples for single items on general well-being is the life satisfaction item that we have, which is basically just one item on a scale of 0 to 10, how satisfied are you with your life, or all things considered, how happy are you? But then we have also a number of scales, like the WEMWEBs, which is the Warwick-Edinburgh Mental Wellbeing Scale, the Quality of Life Scale, the CASP, the General Health Questionnaire, GHQ, and the short form questionnaire here, which contains a few items on emotional well-being, and another scale that's called Compared to with Others. You find those in the overview. And for the domain-specific well-being, we have a lot of single items on different domains like job satisfaction, satisfaction with work-life balance, relationship satisfaction, satisfaction with housing, if the parents are happy with the school that the child goes to, or if the child is happy with the school, and if the parents are satisfied with the school, and the satisfaction with the area they live in. And there are also two scales that go more into self-esteem and self-efficacy, which we have decided to put into the domain-specific well-being items because they're like more specific constructs. To give you just an idea of what the data looks like and how you can use those, I'll show you a little bit about one item we have on life satisfaction in the NCDS and the BCS 70. So the item is just the cohort members were asked, and it was that the questionnaire was that here's a scale from 0 to 10, where 0 means that you're completely dissatisfied, 10 means you're completely satisfied. Please enter the number which corresponds with how satisfied or dissatisfied you are with the way life has turned out so far. And what is so interesting about this item is that it has been used in many of the sweeps in the NCDS at age 33, 42, 46, and 50, and in BCS at age 26, 30, 34, and 42, which allows us to look at how life satisfaction changes over time. So you can, for example, look just at the mean scores for the NCDS cohort, for example. Look at males and females, which looks quite similar. One thing you will notice is that life satisfaction is quite stable, at least if you look at the average score, and it's usually quite high. So between 7 and 8 means, if the scale goes from 0 to 10, means between 7 and 8 is quite stable. There doesn't seem to be that much differences between men and women, but you can do other interesting things. For example, you can look at groups of cohort members who have different numbers of children. The blue line is the group that has no children. The red line is are the ones who have 1 to 3 children. And you see that, for example, men are most satisfied with having 1 to 3 children and least satisfied with having no children. And for women, it's interesting. They're also most satisfied with having 1 to 3 children. But when they have 4 or more children, life satisfaction isn't that different from having no children. So this seems to be like, could be some gender differences here. So that's how you can use it. You can also use, since the life satisfaction item is the same in the NCDS and the BCS 70, you can compare the cohorts. So far they only overlap on 3 of the sweeps at age 33, 34, and age 42. It looks quite similar when you look at life satisfaction. You can do the same for example, job satisfaction. And although I haven't tested this, the difference statistically, this is just a visual figure of how the average scores play out. It does look as if the younger cohort, the BCS, could have maybe slightly lower levels of job satisfaction as compared to the older cohort. It's something interesting to look into, for example. So that was for if you just want to look at a single item. You have lots of time points here. But then if you're interested in a scale, that the advantage is it will give you more rich information because it contains many items than just a single item. We do have, for example, the WEMWEBs in the NCDS as well as the BCS. It is 14 items, including positive affect, psychological functioning, and interpersonal relationships. In NCDS, we have it so far at age 15. In the BCS, we have it at age 42. And I'll just give you an example of a publication of some result that has been published. This is from a paper from 2014, including some of the colleagues from the Center of Longitudinal Studies. This looks at neighborhood cohesion and mental well-being among older adults. And neighborhood cohesion was defined as being feeling very connected with the community that you live in and being satisfied with the area you live in. And they have found a significant correlation that the higher neighborhood cohesion is, the higher is also the mental well-being score on the WEMWebs. So that's an example of how you could use those kind of scores. And that's it so far on for the well-being measures. And now I believe we have time to answer questions.
25 minutes for questions. If anybody would like anything clarified.
Should I scroll up first?
Yeah, this one uses the first.
Here, this one.
Yeah.
That's for
okay. So, can you say a little bit more about the partnership histories? Yeah. So basically, each adult sweep, we have always asked questions about the cohort members' relationships and whether they have a cohabiting partner, whether they're married, and whether between sweeps there's been any changes in their relationship. So if you were to download, if you were particularly interested in looking at transitions in people's relationships, then you can either download each of the individual sweeps, but then that would involve a lot of data work for you. You would need to kind of match in information from lots of the different sweeps to see how people's relationships have changed over time. So the idea of the partnership histories data set and the employment histories data set is to save you the trouble of having to do that. So our data team spent a long time matching up all of the information which has been collected over the course of people's lives to produce a longitudinal history data set which shows all of the transitions that people have had in terms of both their partnerships and their economic activity histories.
Okay.
Okay.
Next one's Lisa's.
Down a
You
bit.
scroll
Down a bit.
down.
There you go, Lisa K.
Yeah. Have any of these well-being measures been used in child samples or only with adult samples? We have in the NCDS and the BCS, let me just look at the overview. In the NCDS, it actually starts in adulthood. The earliest that we asked about life satisfaction was age 23. Actually, it was at age 33, and they asked about life satisfaction 10 years back. For the BCS, there are some well-being measures that were asked at age 16 already. But in the other cohort studies, the Millennium Cohort Study and Next Steps, we have well-being and life satisfaction measures for much younger population. If that is something you're specifically interested in, I would recommend looking at those other cohort studies. They're all included in the variable overview. Okay, is the next question might also be towards me, or I'm not sure. Do you have more information on the malaise inventory and how to combine the questions when the total malaise score is missing?
Well, when the total Malay score is missing, you can simply just add up there's usually a separate variable for each Malays question. So you can add up
for the items, so you can create your own sum
you
score.
can create your own sum score, yeah, because there's usually a variable at each sweep for every Malays question that was asked. But occasionally it's not a 24-point Malays inventory, it's a 9-point Malays inventory, but you can always add them up individually.
Yeah, so but you would have to check whether the total score is missing, because maybe the items are missing as well, because maybe in some cases we don't have the reports on for the Malay score.
Yeah.
So, but if the item scores are in the data set, then you can create your own total scores, and you can double check that they're the same as the total scores provided in the data set by just using some of the ones where you have the total score actually available. That's how I would go about that. Any more questions?
Any more questions?
Okay, well, if anyone, oh, hello. Yeah, I think this, to the person who's just asked another question about deriving Malay scores, I think it might be easier if we followed this up with you after the webinar, actually.
If you'd like to email us, you can email me at b.dodgen@ucl.ac.uk.
The email address should also be on the CLS websites, right?
Yes, that's right.
If you look at staff at CLS, you can email Brian. Okay.
Okay, and any of you are also welcome to ask us any questions after the webinar as well. That's absolutely fine. You can use Brian's email address, or there is a general queries email address on the website, which is
clsfeedback@ucl.ac.uk.
Yes. So maybe use that one rather than Brian's.
Okay.
Okay, we have. We should also.
So yeah, we just wanted to finish off by well, thanking you for joining us for the webinar, and I hope that you found it useful. We would find it very useful if you could take a couple of minutes to give us some feedback about this afternoon's webinar. It's always useful to hear your suggestions about whether there was anything that we could do better when we're next running one of these. So there's a link to a very short feedback survey there on the screen. We'll also going to email you that link. So if you could complete that, that would be much appreciated. So if no one has any more questions right now, we will finish there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.